Good morning again. It is so good to be with you. I bring greetings from Cornell College. Thank you for inviting me to preach today. I also bring greetings, plot twist, from my dad, Danny White, who, when I told him I was preaching here today, shared stories of having played cutthroat basketball in a men's church league against St. Paul's many moons ago. He played with Calvary Baptist and said there was at least one season when St. Paul's was the only team that they lost to. He may actually be coming to the second service, but I'm sure he'll miss most of you, so I bring greetings from him too. When Ryan reached out and mentioned the series, I knew immediately what I was going to preach on. I've been working my way through the book, The Friendship of Women, a Spiritual Tradition, written by Benedictine nun, Sister Joan Chittister. I found it fascinating and was confident that given the timing of your invitation, you all were meant to hear about this too. Using traits of women from the Bible to describe different characteristics of friendship, Sister Joan suggests that the unique ways these women connected with others offers a model for how we might connect a little more authentically. Given your sermon series, it seemed appropriate to turn to the women of the Bible themselves for some of their stories. Of course, you don't have to be a woman to relate to this. We're here to learn from them and see what we might apply to our own lives. As I started doing my sermon prep, I aspired to pack all the things in, but there are limitations of time, so choices had to be made. As I share Sister Joan's words with you today, I invite you to reflect on your own relationships. If you find some of the traits in relationships other than friendships, that's okay too. The important thing is to identify where in your life you find these things. And that brings us to the reason I feel inspired to talk about this, which is because we live lives of speed and busyness. Hopefully, in fact, I'm sure, in this community, you talk about slowing down, getting still and quiet, stopping to smell the roses, and making deep connections with others. But I find that I myself, despite knowing and intending to practice all of these things, regularly fail to take the time to slow down and really see others or create space for deeper connection. I often end up feeling like many of my own day-to-day interactions are a bit hollow. And as a result, life can feel a bit lonely, can't it? Which is odd, because I genuinely want to experience authentic connection with others. I recently turned 40, and for about the whole year leading up to my birthday, I was thinking about where life is and where I want it to go from here. There's just something about those milestone birthdays that bring on the big existential questions, isn't there? One of the things I thought a lot about are the relationships in my life. I thought about the idea of friendship and realized that my social life has changed a lot in the last 15 years. I remembered fondly an earlier stage of life, my late teens to mid-20s or so, when life was largely focused around friends. When I was in college and seminary, my days were spent in class, often with friends, and I hung out and studied with many of those same friends afterwards. We often ate meals together, spent weekends and spring break together, and sometimes even worked or lived together. I know not everyone had this experience. Many transitioned swiftly from adolescence to adulthood, to work or raise a family. But most have some sense of what I'm talking about. A time that was a little more free before adult responsibilities set in, when we spent time with friends. Maybe some of you here today are in this stage right now, and maybe others have had a really hard time making friends. I understand that is a very real experience for many and want to honor that reality too. But for me and many others, we have this experience where our friends are a lot like our family, and then life changes, and we spend a lot of our time working, building a career. Some partner off, raise families, spending time with said partner and little people. Attention shifts, priorities change, and in the process, friendships often do too. I actually remember being at a lot of those basketball games my dad was talking to me about with his church playing St. Paul's. And I imagine that was sort of that early mid-20s, late 20s stage where they had little kids and were still trying to tote us around to all the things, maintaining those friendships. And eventually that, I remember that we no longer went to those games, so I imagine they sort of leaned fully into adulthood, work life, family life. And again, those friendships kind of changed and shifted for them too. The days when your friends feel like part of your family, when free time was spent getting coffee or going to happy hour, when you had nothing but time, mostly become a glimmer in the rearview mirror. Of course, after that, we meet new people and would certainly call some of them friends. Maybe we have work friends, I have book club friends, and we've supported each other through many life changes. We may become friends with parents of our kids' friends, or neighbors, or people at church. And we gain other kinds of relationships, like mentors. But it feels very different than that earlier time, when you could drop by uninvited for a quick cup of coffee and a chat. While I still have close friends, which I am infinitely grateful for, it's harder to see them now, and most of them require a road trip or flight to see in person. And I think that's why I was so curious about what women of the Bible have to teach us about relationships. So let's dig in. We're only scratching the surface today. It may even feel that each trait we talk about is just barely explored before we move on to the next. And there are many elements of friendships that we won't even have time to talk about. But hopefully there's something meaningful for you to reflect on here. I'll pause throughout and invite you to consider whether you have someone in your life who embodies the trait I'm mentioning. If not, that's okay. This is really about pondering who in your life fills your cup, and maybe where you offer these things to other people too. This could be both an invitation to offer gratitude for these relationships or to notice a yearning if something is missing. First, we talk about loyalty. The passage read just a few minutes ago is a conversation between Ruth and Naomi. I chose to lead with this story because this dialogue gives us a very tangible sense of friendship. Plus, fun fact, the name Ruth actually means or translates to friend or woman friend. As the story of Ruth tells us, Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law, and as the men in their lives passed away, they discussed returning to their respective homelands. While Orpah, the other daughter-in-law, agreed and went on her way, Ruth refused to return home and promised her loyalty to Naomi for the rest of her days. Ruth's decision to remain with Naomi ended up ensuring security and protection for both of them. And as the story unfolds, we discover that this was very much a mutual relationship. Naomi had her own gifts to offer Ruth. During a time in which many decisions were made based on social expectations and kinship ties, Ruth reminds us that genuine care and friendship transcends obligation and self-interest. The Ruths of the world teach us both what it means to have a friend and what it means to be one. So I invite you to pause and think for a moment. Who in your life has been a loyal friend? Just bring them to mind, and then we'll move on. Next, we talk about growth. Our next figure has but a brief mention in Acts. Her name is Lydia, and she was the seller of purple cloth. After hearing Paul speak about Jesus, she implored him to stay at her home. She, along with Paul, is credited with the implantation of Christianity in Europe. In Lydia, we see growth. We see the strength to go beyond where we might go alone. Just as she opened her mind and invited others to consider what the possibilities might be in Christ, friends like Lydia help us open ourselves to new ideas. They enable us to become the best we can be. During a time when following Christ was new, if not risky, friends like Lydia provided the environment, the model that leads us to think on our own and stretches us to grow. Who in your life models openness and inspires you to grow? In Deborah, one of the judges of Israel, included in Judges 4 and 5, we see wisdom. The people brought their questions to her for answers, their confusions to her for enlightenment, and their fears to her for calming. She listened, and they trusted that wisdom. In friends like Deborah, we find a friend who doesn't let us stay mired in the day-to-day, shallow, often routine of life. We find a friend who has something to say, and we listen. As a result, we hone our own intuition and challenge our assumptions. Who in your life offers wisdom? In Phoebe, who is mentioned, again briefly, in the book of Romans, we find support. Phoebe was believed to be the one who delivered the letter Paul had written to the Christians in Rome. She was called by Paul a deacon, one who serves, and a benefactor, one who leads and supports others. In her book, Sister Joan asserts that the quiet constancy of these friends give life its composition. These are friends who never miss sending birthday cards, who call just to see how we are, who bring the casserole when we're sick, and who essentially help us hold up our end of the sky. In her serving, she also reminds us that our own gifts are meant to be developed for the sake of the universe. So who in your life supports you and simultaneously reminds you of the invitation that we are also called to share our own unique gifts with the world? Let's now talk about empathy and presence. Veronica, not mentioned by name in the Bible, is named through centuries of oral tradition as one of the women who witnessed and mourned Jesus' crucifixion, referenced in Luke's crucifixion story as part of a group of women. Sister Joan tells us that a woman by the name of Veronica looked on the bruised and bleeding body of Jesus as he struggled his cross up Golgotha alone. In a burst of anguish for pain she could no longer tolerate, she lunged out of the crowd, through the guard, and with a grandiose gesture of compassion, wiped away the blood on his face with the sweep of her own veil. That doesn't mean a lot to us in this room today, but remember that women were often veiled. So we seek the Veronicas of the world for an empathic presence as we endure the tragedies of life. This friend takes off her own veil, in essence exposing her own vulnerabilities to be a balm where there is ache. She does not pretend to solve our problem, but she also refuses to ignore it. We all have those friends that would prefer just to not talk about the hard stuff and let's go have fun and do something. Veronica doesn't do that. She sits with us in our pain. Who in your life shares their own vulnerabilities and walks beside you as you face the tragedies of life? And last, Elizabeth's story unfolds alongside Mary's in Luke, as they became pregnant around the same time. Mary went to stay with Elizabeth, who offered acceptance. For to be pregnant and unmarried in that time was not simply to risk disapproval, it was to risk death. Elizabeth and friends like her, according to Sister Joan, take us into their lives with the ease of family and warmth of love. They offer what we say we look for most in friendship: encouragement, support, and a sense that we are worthwhile human beings. However devastating the circumstances with which we may be struggling, this friend knows that in the end will come goodness, because we know that goodness is at the core of friends we love as ourselves. Who in your life accepts you without judgment? As I pondered big questions a few months ago, I felt infinitely grateful for the people in my life. And I realized that there are many who possess these traits, like my family, people I didn't exactly think of as friends when I was 20. By the time I turned 40, I was excited to see what happens in this next stage of life. For while life still carries plenty of responsibility, I'm well rooted in my career at this point, and now my kids are making their own friends. So as you go about your week, I invite you to spend some more time thinking about the people in your life. Do you have a Ruth who is infinitely loyal? A Lydia who inspires growth in you? A Deborah, a wise friend who guides you? A Phoebe who supports you and inspires you to be that support for others? A Veronica who offers her empathy and presence? An Elizabeth who offers acceptance? If you have people who come to mind, what a gift. If you found a lack of people in your life who offer these elements, it's never too late to put more intentionality and presence behind meeting and nourishing relationships. For time is precious, and relationships are critical to our lives and well-being. If you're curious, the other elements of friendship we would have discussed with more time would be leadership, truth, confirmation of the self, joy, nurturance, and trust and love. Also all very important. May we continue exploring what friendship, what relationship means to us. May we seek and find and nourish these relationships in our own lives. And may we offer the gift of ourselves in friendship with others. May it be so.